Hello, welcome to the Citations and References section, video for primarily for writing and psychology. In this video, we're going to talk about how to write a reference section in APA style. We'll talk about how to cite in text in APA style, actually in the reverse order, and then we'll finish by looking for some common errors in APA citations and references so that you can go forward to write your own and then find errors in your own and help others by finding errors in theirs. So the first thing we should do is differentiate these two terms, citations and references. Citations happen within the body of the manuscript, and what they serve to do is identify the source of a piece of information. Usually I would say across most, well, I shouldn't say that because I don't know, but in APA at least, you cite that with the last name of the author or authors and the year, and we'll talk about how to deal with different numbers of authors in just a second. But the main principle to have in mind with in-text citation is that the first time you use a paper, you should always cite it. The first piece of information that you pull from any paper should be cited. After that, if it's pretty clear that you're still talking about the same paper, you don't always need to cite it over and over again. In other words, if you have a whole paragraph in which you discuss a particular paper, you probably only need to cite it in the first sentence of the paragraph. You might use the names of the authors again just to kind of fill out your sentences to make it clear you're still talking about the same thing, but you don't need to end every sentence with a parenthetical in-text citation. When you do need to is when you switch to a different paper and you go back to the original. So anytime you cite something new and you're going to go back to what you were discussing before, you should cite it again. And there are ways to remove this citation from the text itself by just having it be parenthetical at the end of the sentence. And there are ways to creatively and in a way that's interesting for your reader include those things in the sentence. And I kind of prefer those sometimes. It reminds us that this research is done by people. And too often there is writing in psychology that acts like research did itself, that is written in a way where things just happened and the authors were lucky enough to publish it. No, those people did that research, so we should credit them, and we should talk about them as people. So contrast those with references, which is the full and complete set of information about any source you have at the end of your paper, usually. So the information that's there is going to vary a little bit by source type, which you can contrast with a citation in which you're always going to have the last name of the author and the year. The things that are required in a reference might change. For a journal article, it's going to be pretty much the same across all journals. For websites, it'll be different. For books, it'll be different. So you've got to keep a little bit of track of what those differences are. We'll talk about some of them here, but in general, you can find all those things in the APA manual, the handbook for writing. You can find them in all kinds of places on the web, any place that has current sets of APA style guidelines. In class in psych, you'll mostly be citing journal articles. You'll also probably cite some books, potentially specific chapters within books. And you'll probably here and there be citing websites, but then other than that, there won't be a lot of other things you end up citing. So I recommend you do some work to make sure you have journal article citation down pretty well, and maybe book chapter as well, because then you'll have book within that. But otherwise, you'll be pretty free to look stuff up, and you generally are anyway. I can't think of any exam where you have to cite a journal article based on your memorization of the methodology of that. So here's some more rules about in-text citations. This table shows you the basic styles there. So if your work has one author, you can cite it parenthetically, in which case you would write the author's last name, a comma, and then the year it was published. Or you could cite it in the narrative itself. So in this case, the word Luna would be appearing in your sentence. You'd say something like, as written by Luna, and in that case, you'd want to put 2020 in parentheses right after the name. There's a little bit of wiggle room there. You can sometimes get away with putting the 2020 at the end of a sentence, but that's more... It's a little less common. It's usually best to keep it right in next to the name unless it really breaks the flow of what you're trying to write. The only thing that changes when you move from one author to two, other than the fact that you have to put in both names, is that in a parenthetical citation you use the ampersand, the shift key and the 7 key. And then when you're using the names in a narrative way, you write the word and. So most folks don't forget that side. Usually they write the word and in a parenthetical citation, and that needs to get corrected to the ampersand. Anytime you're citing a work with 3 authors or more in text, you don't have to list them all. We use an abbreviation et al., which stands for and the rest, essentially. Think of it like the end of the Gilligan's Island theme, the original theme. There's 2 important things to note about that. So, of course, you're going to list the first author's name, and then you'll write et al., which are 2 different words. And it's important that there's always a period after the L in all, because, again, it's an abbreviation. So you're going to have the period no matter what if you're using it in a narrative citation, and you'll usually have the period followed immediately by a comma in the parenthetical version of that citation. Sometimes you'll be citing things that have group authors or no individualized named authors. And if those have an abbreviation, you can get away with something like that as long as you define it in the first instance of the citation. So the example here is the National Institute of Mental Health, where if you're going to cite it parenthetically, you could put NIMH in brackets and then use that as your main citation moving forward. Or if you're going to do it narratively, you would put NIMH in the parentheses themselves, and it would kind of look like a parenthetical citation, but then it can be outside once you've defined the acronym. Same for any acronym in APA style. You've got to define it before you use it. And if your group author has no abbreviation, like Stanford University, you wouldn't want to shorten that to SU because then it would become unclear. You can cite it in parenthetical or narrative style, basically the same as if you had a single author. When you put an entry into your reference section, it'll typically take one of these 2 forms. So I believe this first one is a book chapter. So we've got all the authors listed here. In this case, you're going to almost always list all the authors. I think there's a cutoff around like 12, which you might run into here and there, but not very frequently. And then you'll have the title of the work itself, and then the title of the thing it appears in. So this first one, I think I said it looked like a book chapter, but it's very clearly an article in a journal, the journal being Psychology of Popular Media Culture. And then you'll have the volume and the issue and the pages and a working link to the digital object identifier. It's important to keep in mind that when you copy and paste a reference from PsycInfo, like I've showed you in a previous video, that DOI will copy in a specific A&M San Antonio format. So it'll work for other users of our library, but won't work more generally. You have to do some deleting within the link to make sure that it just reads https://doi.org, and then whatever comes after the org in the original link. The second one is an example of how to cite an article from PLOS One, which is an online journal, so it doesn't have page numbers. This just cites the e-page number of that article. But otherwise, it looks pretty much the same. And there's examples of parenthetical and narrative citations underneath. It also gives us the chance for me to tell you one other detail here, which is if you have a parenthetical citation in which you're citing multiple papers, you should alphabetize those citations. So alphabetize them by the first letter in the last name of the first author. In this case, Grady comes before Jerentrup. DOIs are not ubiquitous yet, but if an article has a DOI, you must include it in your reference. Some articles may not have one, and if you find an article that does not and is from an academic research database, you can end the reference usually after the page range. But in other instances, you might want to paste in the full URL. It just depends. You very rarely will need a full URL unless you're citing just a website. But if it's a journal article, you can finish after the page range. You don't usually need to give any database information, like if you found it on PsycInfo. It's not really a helpful thing for folks to find it again because they could use whatever search method they wish. So PsycInfo shouldn't ever appear in your references. Things like Sage and other publishing house names don't ever need to appear either. So what I say down below here is that, yeah, if you do actually have if you can find a URL that will work, you should pretty much always include it in an instance where you don't have a DOI. So forgive me, I maybe misspoke a little bit earlier on this slide. If you can find a URL, you should use it. And then as we saw on the previous page, if the journal has an article number instead of a page range, make sure you include that. And as I've already said, if you copy the DOI from PsycInfo, it might be specific to your university, so make sure you generalize it. Okay, so here is the journal article linked to with that tiny URL that I created on the slide there. So if you go straight to it, you see we're on Sage Journal's website, and you can actually find the DOI right here. Copy it straight out of there if we so chose. We can get all the other information we need as well. The authors, the title of the paper, the title of the journal is Psychological Science, and then we have a publication date here. Let's see if we can find the other relevant info. Maybe not without getting the PDF, although there is a cite button. Let's see what the cite button gives us. That's pretty close. Oops. That's pretty close. We've got names and all the info we need. We just have to do a little bit of editing to put this in the right format. See that we'd need periods between the letters on all of their names. We'd need to put the date up at the front. We'd need to italicize the volume and take the journal and leave the issue like that. And then we need to change we'd put a period between, or excuse me, a comma between that and the page numbers. And then we'd have to put in the HTTPs type intro to get the DOI correct. But this is pretty close, but it, I'd say, is quite telling that even when you grab the citation from a psychology journal database, it might not always look perfect. Oh, I've got it in AMA style. Let's see if it corrects when I go to APA. And there we go. Looks fabulous. So you might hit the cite button and move on too quickly. And if you were to do that, you would miss out on this chance to get excellent APA style. There is a little discussion surrounding the difference between the long and short dash. I am not going to delve really deeply into that when I grade your stuff for this class, but know that other folks might. But here's a couple other spots for information. We've got style and grammar guidelines for citations. You can think a little bit about how to pair authors and dates using the advice on this page. It's where I got some of the slides that I showed you in this video. It talks about whether and when to repeat a citation. So this is all good stuff. Don't include suffixes like junior in text. It's a nice little detail. And here's some other examples from APA. You get all kinds of examples of any type of textual work here, and any online media, audiovisual, and data sets. So lots of good resources there. All right, so whenever you are working through the full reference of an APA citation, you can pull those elements out of the PDF of the paper. And so I'm going to talk about the paper that I was just linking to on the previous slide. So if you want to download that PDF, maybe work your way back around through the A&M library so that you can get it yourself. I'm going to show you little screenshots of the areas from which you can pull all the information you're going to need. So there are the authors. There is the year it was published based on the copyright. Here's the title of the paper itself. We've got the journal it was in, the volume and issue of that journal, and then the first and last page number. You might not always be able to find the DOI on the paper itself. I grabbed this from the publisher's website. And so we can take all this information and zip-zop, it suddenly can be formed into a full APA-style reference, which I've done, I believe, perfectly here. Write me if I've made a mistake. I'm pretty sure I haven't. Couple extra notes. We've abbreviated the author's first and middle names. Try to avoid those common errors. There is a single space after each punctuation. We've got the ampersand here, and then technically this is supposed to be the N dash. There is an N dash and an M dash. The M dash is the longer one. That actually looks like an M dash if I was to say. I think it should be a little shorter than that. Make sure you have the right punctuations between your elements, commas where they should be, periods where they should be. Make sure you capitalize the first word of titles and subtitles, but not every single word in an article title, unless it's a proper noun or, again, the first word of a subtitle. So notice that none of these are capitalized. One of them might be if there was, say, a colon and a sort of second half to the title, then you would capitalize the beginning of that subtitle or second part of that first title. You do capitalize all content words for journal titles, so you leave out like articles, adjectives, prepositions of, and the, and stuff like that. Italicize the journal name, italicize the volume. Everything else is standard. There's no bolding in this. And then you put the issue number in parentheses, and again, the page numbers with that N dash between them. One other piece of advice I can give you is that as you move through a psych major, and actually as you move beyond one and into designing research projects of your own, it can be really, really beneficial for your workflow to get into a citation manager. One I recommend is called Mendeley. The video linked to on the slide here will take you to an explainer of what Mendeley is and what the purpose is. Essentially, this is about establishing good habits as a researcher, making sure that your papers are organized, giving you the ability to search all the text of everything you've put in there all at once, creating reference sections really easily with excellent APA style, and all that kind of stuff. It's much, much easier than, say, pulling together 30 papers for the last paper you write in your major and then having to write out all those citations by hand. So I really recommend looking into a citation manager as you move forward in the major. So to wrap this process up of this class, think about what your major impressions were. What parts of this were new to you? Where were your gaps? Do you still have any gaps in your knowledge? What can you go and find to fill them in? And exactly how that relevance is going to apply to you personally. Which of these common errors do you make most? That completes the citation and reference video. Thanks for watching.